So, welcome to the newest episode of Passion for Processes. This program aims at discussing processes with passionate colleagues, partners, customers, and thought leaders from all around the world. Why passion for processes? Why are people really passionate about processes, or why should they be? In this series, I have the chance to discuss with experts on their views on processes, on process management, on process mining, and other related topics. So we learn also from their experience, maybe their pitfalls, their challenges, or best practices. And we also sometimes take a look into the future of BPM. So welcome to my very special guests today, namely Roland Woldt and J-M Erlendson. They are very special guests for me for two reasons. The first one is I worked closely with them, and despite of the distance, I shortly enjoy a meal with my friend J-M in Toronto. Second, they both drive together a podcast on enterprise architecture and business process management, and I think that's exciting. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining, taking the time. I know you are both very busy guys, so I really appreciate you having the time to discuss with me on processes and passion for processes. So, and before we go into the topic of today, which is more about rollout, change management, and also your podcast, I would like to start with a short introduction round to get a little bit more about your background and how long you are with processes. So maybe okay. Roland, you want to start. So I know you worked as a team lead, program manager, solution architect on many different projects at Accenture, Software AG, KPMG, and many more. So maybe you give us a short introduction about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So happy to do that. So I'm Roland Woldt. I'm a vice president of global consulting at iGrafx, which is a process management tool vendor. Hint, hint, Joseph. Mm-hmm. I worked until a couple of weeks ago. I worked at Software AG together with those two lovely individuals here, and spent 7 years at KPMG running their EA offering for the US firm there. Worked before that with IDS Shear, which is the predecessor of organization of Software AG back in the early 2000s, and with Accenture and all those other guys. So I'm doing that consulting gig for 25 plus years now. Had the wonderful idea to start a blog called whatsyourbaseline.com last year after about 16 years that I was thinking about doing it. So finally I did it, and a podcast came out of it, which I obviously know we will talk about that a little bit later.
All right, thank you, Roland, so much for that. And now over to you, J-M. So you're the business process architect, you're a methodology specialist, and I know, and I listened to you, you're one of the greatest conference speakers I ever heard. So Can you maybe share some insights from your, I think it's 15 or it's even more years of experience in BPM?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm a transformation engineering lead here at Software AG and a specialist in the ARIS platform. But I've been with Software AG for 11 and a half years. And before then, I was part of management consulting, where, of course, we leveraged ARIS to deliver best practices. It was our force multiplier, which is where I got introduced to the platform through academic work and through management consulting. But before that, I was a manufacturing engineer. So process is in my blood. You know, it just the abstraction thereof was a natural fit through consulting and eventually through working at Software AG. And, you know, the idea of speaking at conferences isn't something new. I come from a long line of entertainers, grew up with my first job as a professional clown. So entertaining people is truly in my actual blood. And I'm excited to be here today and also be part of the What's Your Baseline podcast to help bring a little bit of a different spin, a little bit more of a human touch to process and process management, and in particular, make it applicable and understandable by a lot of different people from different backgrounds, from different levels of their career, and from different interests and skill sets. I love that.
Oh, that sounds great, and we're coming back to that afterwards.
Absolutely.
Indeed, you just said one thing. Processes are in your blood, and this series is called Passion for Processes.
Oh yeah.
So maybe you want to jump into that one and tell me a little bit about why you are passionate for processes.
Absolutely. I think it starts with process-oriented thinking. And that's something that isn't necessarily intuitive to everyone. I was trained at the University of Toronto when I first started thinking about process in a physical process perspective. And having that idea that the work you do can be conceptualized and broken down into subcomponents that are repeatable, things you can document and share, how you can build and accumulate knowledge. that takes a regimented mindset and approach, and then naturally from that must emerge platforms that allow you to keep that information consistent, platforms that allow you to collaborate and grow as a collective rather than as an individual actor. I've seen so many times, particularly as I was coming from university into my first few jobs in working life, the idea of this hero mentality, people who were excellent at a thing, the superstars. And when I watched a lot of my colleagues, friends who were superstars burn out at their jobs and their organizations achieve a lot less of the value that on paper they presented. And I think part of that problem was their mindset was very much about delivery. They weren't thinking about what they were doing. They were just naturally talented at it. Think about an athlete who's got a very good bone structure that allows them to perfectly deliver on a thing, but they can't teach it. Or a musician who's intuitively talented. I work still in music, and so I see that happen all the time. People who are intuitively talented but can't explain how they do what they do. In some ways, that's kind of an island. You've constrained that knowledge to a single actor. And when you have a process-oriented mindset, you can watch collective effort, collective development drive amazing achievements more than the sum of their parts. And I think in some ways that's a great equalizer. It allows people from different backgrounds and perspectives to collectively contribute to a global achievement. That's fantastic. And that's really good process design, management, decision making, and really the core of excellent enterprise process improvement.
Wow, I think I just realized that I'm much less enthusiastic about process than J-M is.
I wanted to ask you, Roland, what about you? Because you can feel the passion with J-M.
I think it's a little bit more pragmatic. That might be my German upbringing, to see things more sober, I guess, But what you have is a lot of people have tons of ideas. How do we do business? What are new product ideas? How do I make a splash, right? But it's just a lower number of people who actually can pull this off. And I think this is where process kicks in, right? You need to understand the end to end. You need to understand where's the place where you want to go, and all these type of things. And processes are the way to get there, right? And typically you see it's not the best idea or he who has it first. It's the person who can pull it off the first who will make the big money at the end of the day, right? And I think this is where a lot of people just fail. And this is what I found interesting in process management. And the first time I saw it when I did that in '97 with the Deutsche Bahn project, and everybody says, "Ooh, we're using this tool and it's all collaborative, but don't touch it, you break things." You know what the first thing is, what happens is, you raise curiosity and say, oh, how can I break this stuff, without getting caught, of course. And that's how I came into process management.
Oh, I love that. Indeed, I wanted to ask before, so you are more of the structured guy, which is important to you, and you feel the passion too still. But maybe Roland, I'm sure you have a favorite example or an analogy for processes to let your grandma or your grandpa know what is a process. What do we mean by process? How do you explain that to them?
Oh, that is a very good question. I obviously could come back with saying a process is a sequence of steps that produces something with the objective to accomplish a business result. I think it's
you could.
Yeah, hey, I've done that once or twice. But I think that the more interesting thing is it's a structured way to create repeatable results. And I think this is especially in manufacturing, especially in regulated industries and all these things, that's a key thing, right? Be predictable in what you want to produce.
So maybe one of you, do you have a specific example on how do you depict processes for your grandma? So I had some examples on recipes, on the moon, the course of the moon or the sun. So anything you would use?
When my family asked me, what do I do for a living? I said, I push pixels, on a virtual canvas. And I just remember when my little son, and I'm not supposed to say little anymore because he's 20 now and he's having a job and all that stuff. But when he was in middle school, so 6th, 7th grade, he came down into my office, this wonderful room behind me, and he was looking at what I'm doing. And I was asking him, hey, Carl, what do you want to do when you're grown up? I waited to ask that question. And he looked at me and says, I don't know yet, Dad, but not what you are doing.
Oh, you won't believe that, but my daughter said exactly the same to me the last week.
Here you go.
That's funny. Oh, cool. But as I know, both of you are very experienced. So, and you both know that modeling and the process as a picture or as a flow is just the beginning, yeah? Because where transformation and excellence really comes in, it's when you get the buy-in of the organization. So it's really about making sure the whole organization is aligned, is following on the process, and that's key. So, and that's what we call change management, or also rollout, right, for processes. So, and do you think it has changed, change management and rollout of processes in the last year? So do you see a development in the topic of change management?
I would see it in a slightly different twist, and I hope you don't hate me for that.
No,
because the graphic that I typically show to clients is a Venn diagram with 3 circles, right? So one is content. So everything that you want to do, you know, from process modeling, process analysis with mining, whatever, all that stuff, you know, what they want to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
The second one is governance. It's how do I run the show here? You know, what is expected from you, Joseph, in your role as modeler, from you, J-M, in your role as release manager, and so on and so forth, right? And you derive permissions and capabilities and all that type of stuff from this. And the third one is, which is actually my pet peeve, because I started at Accenture way back when in the change management competency, is adoption, right? And adoption is not only figuring out where you want to go and plan it, so what you would call a BPM strategy, for example, but it's also communication, it's enablement, it's org design. And I think those things easily get forgotten, right? And I typically say, and you heard me saying that on the podcast a couple of times, it doesn't matter how many wallpapers you have on your wall, you know, process diagrams. It doesn't matter how many black boxes you have in your basement, you know, servers and stuff. If the person in front of the screen does not want to do it, they won't. And you can do whatever you want. They will just refuse it, right? So there's obviously a lot of things that you can do and you should do, starting with figuring out who are your stakeholders, who's your audience, what are their needs, what are their desires, you know, and then come up with the 3 things that I just mentioned, org design, communication, and enablement that's adjust to your target audience.
Yeah, and on my side, I must say I see sort of the same thing. In a lot of ways, I feel like we're sort of flipping the script on the traditional view of process and process modeling platforms. I think for a long time, organizations and software vendors were really trying to make things easier for the modelers. So how can I make it easier and easier for people to model process? But like we talk about on the podcast, it's not about how many processes you model. That doesn't really matter. It's how well you follow process as an organization. You can't make a metric on documentation. That doesn't tell you the efficacy. So the script has been flipped between making it easier for process modelers and architects to making it easier for end executors to follow process.
But that is just a side aspect of it. I think nobody buys a modeling tool because they always wanted to have a modeling tool. But no, I haven't seen that. If so, send them to me. I would love to meet those persons.
Yes, please.
I think what we need to keep in mind is always the why. What's the purpose? Why do we do this thing, right? And when you take that lens, then you have to take a step back and think about the full life cycle, right? Yes. What you want is a couple of different I wouldn't say artifacts, different things, assets. You know, you want to have an enterprise baseline. You want to understand what runs, because that's your first step to see where do we need to improve. Do we actually accomplish what we want to accomplish, right? And you start building plans on that enterprise baseline. You know, where do I want to be in 6, 12, 18 months from now? And then you pick up one of those ideas and you create a solution design, right? And I find it flabbergasting when I look here in the United States, when I compare this to building a hotel, for example, right? Typically, one would expect you go to an architect and the architect does a drawing and load calculations and all that type of stuff before you even start building. Here in the US, IT departments just jump virtually in their pickup truck, go to the home improvement store, buy 2x4s, hammers and nails, and start hammering. You know, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And then once you have this, the monitoring part comes in, where you want to see, do we actually in our day-to-day execution do the right amount of widgets in the right amount of time and the right amount of quality? Or with a little bit further perspective, you use things like process and task mining to figure out, are there patterns in my execution? Are there things that I don't want, variations? Are there, whatever, do my people do what they're supposed to do? What I designed them to do and all this stuff. So I would love to take that a little bit wider perspective, start with the why and have a look at the whole process lifecycle and not just say, oh yeah, you must buy a modeling tool.
No, that's, yeah, I fully agree with that. And you mentioned the why, and I think that's the best way to get people onboarded, to really to support change and to make sense to these people. But anything else that you would really want to share with the audience to how to get everyone involved and really on board? So following the processes, because we all know this is a big challenge. I mean, your example with the hammering is the best one.
Yeah. I think that there has been this idea in the market and with a lot of sort of employee-employer relationships, this idea of trust, this concept of radical transparency, this idea of revealing the actual inner workings of things, like the why, so tailoring it to business strategy and communicating that business strategy in a raw form to employees so they understand things at a level they've never seen before. This transparency into the way management works is fantastic. I would say that now we're seeing a ton of this, but it's become an information overload. And so I call it radical tailored transparency. You can reveal all the information, but you need to focus it in on the end executor's needs right now. So open up the space, give them all the things they could possibly want, but only constrain it to what they need to know right now.
And that's also another thing. And I agree with you, JM, on being transparent in what you do, right?
Yeah,
the
but
look behind the curtains. But the point is, what I would recommend to do is have a look at what your audience is, what your stakeholders are, what I just mentioned before, figure out where their head is going, and then develop a point of view. Don't say, I want to appease everybody. Don't say, hey, we can make this happen. And Joseph, wink, wink, we can put your little goodie in there too, right? That doesn't work. Develop your own vision of where the ship should sail, right? And communicate that to the stakeholders, right? Because they might or might not agree. And then communicate that vision that you have, where the process should go, where the organization should go, where the individuals in the organization should go to them. Because that, when you repeat this over and over again, creates that shared vision that you need.
The other thing is that you always want to tie in user action to the outcomes you're putting in your strategic plans. I think one of the things that I've learned very much in the past couple of years is about how it needs to seem like the things you're doing have a meaningful contribution to the company's goals, so that it's not random. Like, I'm not doing a thing and then later on the company reports a number and I can't make that connection. That why statement has to allow an employee to see what their meaningful contribution ends up looking like as a metric that is being sent to the market or to shareholders or in general around the company as a success metric.
And to give you an example of that, in one of my previous employers, who shall not be named, obviously, they bought a process modeling tool and said, okay, we're going to use that for our project delivery, and they created reference models and all that type of stuff. And it worked very, very well in sales situations when they said, hey, we can accelerate your implementation projects because we have the blueprint already 75% done, yada, yada, yada. They spent millions in implementing the tool, right? Trainings, whatever, videos, and so on and so forth, right? Customizing the tool and whatnot. It was not accepted because where they failed was there was a difference between the sell and the delivery. And the way how they were structured, that poor engagement director who was on it, he didn't have the appetite for another new tool, right? And he wasn't interested in working for the greater good of the organization when he had some deadlines to meet because he had a client breathing down their neck. And learning something new on top of it where you don't see the purpose and the need for it, that's just inconvenient. Right, and therefore they had a huge problem in the acceptance, up to a point where I'm pretty sure some said, "Can we just skip this thing and put it back on the shelf and let it collect dust?"
And one of the places I've seen a lot of people feel that connection is actually in ESG, which is a cool, interesting use case. Environmental social governance. People are personally human invested in sustainability, in environmental, in social issues. And I feel like when you can see that process is helping to move the needle on those things, I mean, I really believe that process will save us. I believe that good governance, good process is the path forward that will help to ensure that environmental regulations can be followed, that they're clear, that they're achievable, that we can ensure that there are processes in place to have ethical treatment of workers, to ensure that the ethical sourcing of goods. Like, I think process will save us. And when people see that and they connect it in with their values, then they know that the work they do imparts that value to the organization and to the world as a whole, and that's incredible value.
That's great, and that brings me to my conclusion to that, and that's what I feel, and I cannot agree more than with you than on the ESG topic, J-M. That's really what you both mentioned, and I think it brings us back to passion, really to drive things with passion and with a big contribution, because people need to have this feeling of a meaningful contribution. So I think the words you both choose are exactly the right one. Doing the right things for the company, for the sake of the world, or whatever else. And I think that's what brings this rollout or the change to success. But now that we've talked a lot about business, and I just want to make a short little game with you, all right? Yeah. So it's called This or That. And I have specific questions for you, especially the first one is for you, Roland, because as you mentioned before, you come from Germany, you live since a long time in America, and I just want to ask you, Europe or America?
Oh, gee, can I plead the fifth?
That's American if I've ever heard
it. I actually like it here a lot. People are. Europeans always think Americans are superficial, Now living here for 15 years, I just notice it's the social lubricant that you have. The little chat, you won't see that person anymore. But that little social lubricant makes the day-to-day life so much easier. While being back in Germany, I don't want to diss the French people on the call here, but being back in Germany, it's like they're all grumpy, what is that your business? Go away, and it's like, loosen up, guys, loosen up. Learn from the North American people.
Oh, I like it. It's very honest. So a more business-related one for you, J-M. EPC or BPMN?
Roland,
is that even a question? Is that even a question, guys?
Roland and I fight about this.
Yes, it is a question.
I like BPMN. I understand what it represents. I am EPC. And here's the reason why. I believe in function-focused modeling. I want to ask the question first, what do I do? And I feel like when you take a look at swim lanes as a principle, they are containers. The first question you ask is who is involved. And I don't care about that. I feel like that's very malleable. When I take a look at EPC, I always think the first question is what happens next? And those are a lot easier questions to answer from a stakeholder perspective. People will know what that means. You don't define the solution as you model the process. You allocate the solution to the process, as you solution out how to achieve those goals you've put in the line. And I know Roland and I disagree on this one a little bit, but I came from the world of EPC modeling. I definitely do BPMN modeling for a vast majority of my clients. I know it is a higher percentage just because of its global standard, but I do like EPC more.
So obviously I disagree with J-M.
I know.
That's a standard for a reason. But we also had our 15 minutes of fame in one of our What's Your Baseline shorts, if you want to hear more about that.
I know.
About this. So
and we'll come back to the podcast in a minute. So another one for you, Roland. I know it's not an easy one too. Modeling or mining?
Say it again, please.
Modeling or mining?
Both. I would start nowadays, because the technology is more advanced now, I would start with mining, because it's when you do modeling, you call in your SMEs. You obviously have a limited sample of SMEs. they typically tell you what they think you want to hear. Oh, we should have replaced our ERP system 25 years ago, blah, blah, blah. They think in problems. They don't think happy pairs. They don't think whatever, the bigger picture. Yeah. With mining, you just take out that subjectivity. It's just the damn facts. Oh, yeah. Look what you did. That's not pretty. Let's fix that.
I like it. Yeah, good summary. J-M, specific one for you. Customer meeting or musical?
Is this a professional podcast? I should respond. No. Here's the truth: is they both are the same thing. The word is performance. A performance is a way of a comportment that allows you to communicate a message. And through a musical, you're doing it through song, you're doing it through acting, you're doing it through dance. You're building the spirit and the feeling in the room that people can share in. Customer meeting is kind of the same thing. It's just the context is around the presentation you're looking to give and the business you're looking to achieve. But they are the same thing. I happen to like the way that musicals choose to represent it more, but the both of them are the same thing to me, a performance.
I love your answer. And last one, that's the end over to the next one, and that's for both of you. Who goes first wins, podcast or YouTube?
Podcast.
YouTube.
Why?
J-M, you disagree with me. Get started,
I do.
Please.
I do. I'll start. So why do I think YouTube is more powerful? I think that one of the things that is most important about communication is feeling a connection with a speaker. And YouTube, there are a couple of components to it that I think are really important. Number one is the interactive feedback in the form of comments. YouTube is much better structured to help have a dialogue with the speaker. And the second thing is that I think that there is a very human experience in seeing a person as their mouth moves. You can understand them. You can sort of put yourself in their shoes. That empathy makes the message connect in a different way. I know it's less convenient in a lot of ways. I think podcasts are quite convenient. The delivery mechanism is great, but there is something very special about that visual moment.
I'm biased, obviously.
Yes.
I think it's a podcast because it's a more intimate situation. You listen to podcasts with your favorite activity, like commuting to work or mowing the grass, all that type of stuff. While if you watch a YouTube video, you either look at your computer or your TV, and it's a much more formal setting. What I like with podcasting is, and I've read a quote, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but Google did a study how people buy. And they say before today somebody makes a decision to buy, they need to have at least 7 hours of interaction with you in some form or fashion, reading your material, listen to you on conferences, podcasts, whatnot. And they need about 11 interactions with you, download stuff, whatever, speaking with you in person, these type of things. And I think podcasts are a good way. And J-M, you and I have seen that, when we had clients approaching us who thought they knew us. I remember one thing when we were working together, a account rep called me and she said, "Hey, I got this prospect and he's listening to your podcast. I thought it would be a neat idea if you and J-M could join, and I said, sure, sign me up, and we both showed up the next Tuesday and he was just dialing in. He says, "Oh, my boys, they're here," and it was like, oh, okay, I don't know this gentleman, but he obviously knows us, and I think this is the power of podcasts. It's just more intimate and people build a relation with you because they hear your voice and they hear your voice for hours and hours and hours. I hope. That's
true, but to jump on that, I got the same experience with the series that we have on YouTube, so this Passion for Processes or this Women in BPM series. I have people contacting me, well, I do feel I know you, blah, blah, blah. It was, okay, that's nice.
Yeah. Great.
So obviously, we want to talk about your podcast. So you created some time ago. What's your baseline podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
and we have T-shirts too.
yeah, I saw that today. You sell them too, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's a few bucks. Yes.
So you have this What's Your Baseline podcast, and it's exploring the topic of enterprise architecture and business process management. So now we all want to know a little bit more about it. So maybe Roland, you want to start, because you just said at the beginning it's an idea you had for such a long time. How did you came to that?
Oh, well, I went through unused domains, right, that just expired at some point in time. And I had a half-headed attempt to get the blog started around 2010, 11, and then it slept and whatnot, because there's a thing called LiveCom in between. But the original idea was, and this is where we came, our subtitle is EA and BPM Demystified. Because what you hear is a lot of gobbledygook, BPMN, TOGAF, SAFE, whatever. Nobody knows what that actually is and if it's important or not, And it's that virtual wall which behind people hide, right? And our idea was my idea was to break that down. That was one aspect, just show transparency, to quote J.M.'s words, how these things work. The other one was just based on my need that I had. At that point in time, back in 2005, I was a project manager, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could share my experience, how to run these things? What are the steps that somebody needs to go through to be successful, right? And I was tinkering with the idea of books and whatever. And at the end of the day, last year, I said, okay, just sit down and just do it. Right, and that would be my only recommendation for everyone who's thinking about that. It doesn't cost a thing. All the software is free. You need to buy a microphone and maybe a webcam, and that's about it. Just get started.
And how did you come to the idea to do that together?
Yeah, I have to admit that was my idea as well, because I thought it's a little bit awkward if you have a one-person show. Right. And I applaud everybody who can pull that off, sitting in front of a microphone and babbling for half an hour and make it in a very entertaining way. J.M. could pull this off. I couldn't. Right.
Oh.
And we were talking, J.M. and I were talking about this. And I said, hey, J.M., I got that wonderful idea of a podcast talking about BPM and EA. Are you in? And it took him about, I guess, 3 milliseconds to say yes. And then it was all about, okay, how do we do this? And out of that, we created a list of content that we wanted to talk about. We figured out the technology, we bought the equipment and all that type of stuff. And the rest is history, as they say, because we're now actually in season 3 of our podcast. Yeah. And I think that's quite an accomplishment.
Oh, yeah. And for me, it was obvious. I mean, this is the kind of thing, there's sort of 2 things I really wanted to see with this podcast that I'm really glad we've been able to achieve. Number one is that I meet with clients all the time. I think it was in 2019, I took 182 meetings with clients, 182, something like that. And the questions that I get from clients are so similar.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks that there's something special. They're like unique in the market. And only we struggle with this. No one else could possibly ask these things. And the truth is that everyone's got the same worries. It's like high school health class.
No,
you put in those anonymous things.
JM,
everyone has the same worries.
It's like your mom, JM. You're special.
Exactly. Well, no, but it's the truth is that when we are able to reveal that, and everyone's struggling with the same insecurities about how they're doing process, how they're building architecture, what sort of things they should be worried about. We get the same questions over and over again from clients. And so the first purpose of the podcast was to help answer these very common questions with answers we give over and over, these pad answers we have to send to every single person one at a time. That seems silly. We should do it as a podcast to be able to make it a reusable piece of content like we would normally ask from a process. But the second thing is that I put myself in the shoes of somebody in their mid-20s to late 20s, sort of looking for a path in their career where their knowledge might come from mostly academia and a small portion from the real world. And what are they going to need as a catalyst to take them into a process-oriented mindset, to give them the capabilities to look at enterprise architecture as a discipline for a profession, to find the right kind of resources that they need to really pursue a career in what we do right now? How can I make somebody who's more than 10 to 15 years younger than me, get to where I am faster, because I would have wanted that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to serve that next generation while also trying to serve the people who I talk to right now.
But it's not only for those people. So I saw it's as you say, it's so for newbies in the business process management areas, but it's also for experienced people, because you really tackle topics, like EPC and BPMN. So why the differences? Yeah.
So the idea that I had while defining the audience, and that would be one tip if you start a podcast: define your audience and what they want to know. It was basically, we saw 3 layers, right? One is, and that's my main audience, which is different than J-M's. It's the people who run practices, right? So that might be because they might be more my age than the 20-something-year-old. But the idea is, okay, how do I pull this off? How can we help them? And we not only do that with a podcast. I wrote about 80 articles on the website, and honestly, I sent proposals to clients where I put an outline of an implementation project, and I put footnotes in it, and I link to those articles. Oh, read this.
Yeah.
That saves a lot of time. But that was the main idea. However, there are questions to say, oh, how do I do this in this tool, right? And I'm not interested in that at all for the podcast. I would say go to your vendor of choice. Go to an iGrafx, go to a Software AG, go to a Mega, whatever. They will teach you which button to press.
Yes.
Right? That's not important. It's important where you want to go, how to get there. And then the other one is when you think level above, it's the person holding the strings, because the audience, people running the practices, are directors, are maybe VPs, they might not have the unlimited budget, and they have to ask for it. So you need to bring content to them that they have the arguments when they go to their boss and say, hey, give me 25K to do this or 100K to do that they have the right arguments to make their case.
I like that too. Yeah. It's not about the tooling, it's about the why and the how you do that, and then the rest is just techniques.
Yep.
Yeah, indeed. By the way, we're preparing another podcast together, and I saw that you modeled even your podcast processes, content definition, governance. Can you tell a little bit more about that, because it's in ours?
two words. Professional deformation. So when we were using a collaborative tool called Notion for planning all the podcasts and listing the episodes, and then guests, and Joseph and Gabi will be guests on a very future episode about women in process. It's a way just to collaborate with guests, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, then you have to tell, okay, how do we run the show here? And the easiest way to do it was to draw a process model, very straightforward, 5, 6, 7 steps, and then say, okay, this happens recording day minus 4 weeks. This happens recording day minus 1 week. Oh, this happens at recording and after, and all that type of stuff. Yeah. Because it just gives the context for the guests and what we expect, because they like to forget to send a photo, for example, that we need for the show notes and all these things. And you can say, hey, Joseph, do you remember that process? You have a part in that to play, and that just makes our life a lot easier.
Yeah. And don't feel like it's not normal, because I have the same professional deformation in everything I do on the private side. So lately I was in the kitchen, I was cutting some stuff, and at the same time I was, burning some stuff in the pan, and I was like, oh, it's all parallelized. These are processes parallelized, and these are my steps. And that was really because I had this this process model in my mind. So I think.
So you had an event-driven gateway in your process model, right?
Yeah, and I had my goal. I wanted nice food. That's it.
Oh yeah.
So thanks very much, guys, for all your thoughts and this great discussion. But still, I have 2 last questions before we close this interview today. Is how do you see the future of BPM? You can pick one. And how do you see the future of your podcast? And you are, of course, allowed to tell us where we find you.
I'll start, and then Roland can cap us off here. So I heard a really great quote, and I want to sort of rebroadcast it a little bit. So on the podcast, I like to say that data may be king, but context is its crown. So that all the time, I love it very much. It sort of imparts authority to the data that you have. But I heard somebody say that in the future, leading companies will be formalizing and approving the means of combining a human domain knowledge with a data model. And I think that's such a fascinating conversation starter here, because I think the future of BPM is taking context and applying it to massive quantities of data. And so when I think about process mining and modeling, I think of them as feeders for each other into a unified experience of driving data-driven transformation or evidence-based transformation by subject matter experts with human domain knowledge to inform and contextualize. And I'm really excited for that. I mean, with the Eris platform, we already do that in a lot of ways with Eris mining and modeling being part of this ecosystem of continuous improvement. But I think there's even more of an evolution to go things like RPD, so robotic process discovery, through things like automatic automations, through sort of like a templated driven insight-based automation. And I think that the future of BPM and BPA, BPE, whatever you want to call it, is going to be focused on ingesting and collecting and bringing to sort of one solution, data and people. And I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you said, J-M, so no doubt about it. But I think it's more taking a step back. And I would ask you, Joseph, to put in the show notes a link to an article that Helge Hess wrote, where he says, oh, there's way more ways of mining, right? So organizational mining and all these things. I think that's a very good piece of content that your audience should read. I liked it and enjoyed it very much. The other thing that we will see, BPM will change from process modeling to the full life cycle that I spoke about. So we're talking about process intelligence, we're talking about process design, and we're talking about process automation. And those three things will grow together. And when I look at the current marketplace, there may be 3 or 4 vendors who can do all 3 of them. And 2 firms are represented on this podcast here of those. But I think this is where the ship is sailing, right? And I hope that this message will be just spread more widely, right? And people stop thinking about, oh, I need a best of breed, or I just cobble it together with duct tape and chewing gum. You know, that doesn't resonate for me.
Okay. And about the future of your podcast, how do you see that?
Well, I already got a gray beard, so I hope to see J-M's beard getting gray.
Yeah.
We have no ideas of stopping it. So what we do is we do have 2 seasons per year. So basically just half a year, 12 episodes, and then we take a little break in summer, gun fishing and over the holidays, and then we just continue. What we're thinking about is or at least I'm thinking about, is maybe changing the format a little bit, because currently we have like 1-hour episodes and I see the drop-off rates and all these type of things. We also twiddled a little bit with video, where we had our What's Your Baseline shorts. And I'm looking at that, so we're going to revive those occasionally. But then there's other thoughts that we had, like master classes and whatever might come up into mind, live sessions and all those wonderful things that I think we're going to explore then in season 4 and thereafter.
Yeah, we have some amazing guests already have come on the show, and so many more to come. I'm really excited for next week's episode, which is with one of my good friends, Wings, who talks about QA, QC, QE. Check out that episode from whenever this podcast publishes. You're looking for the August 22nd episode of What's Your Baseline 2022, and there's some amazing stuff coming. So keep your eyes peeled to what'syourbaseline.com/podcast, and you'll get lots of great updates for the great guests and great thought leadership to come on the podcast.
Yep, and just to chime in, obviously you can find. I knew Joseph, you wanted to ask that question. You can find obviously J-M and I on LinkedIn. There. What we also did is we created a community page for What's Your Baseline. I think it's linkedin.com/company/What's Your Baseline, if I'm not mistaken. And we currently have a community of about 700 plus people there. So if you want to be informed about our shenanigans, we post a couple of times a week, quotes from the shows, hints what's coming next, thought-provoking articles, I hope. On it, and we're happy to have the conversation with you there.
So, and we will put the link in the notes and in the video, so no problem. Everyone is going to be able to find the What's Your Baseline podcast, because I also really appreciate, I love listening to both of you. It's fun, it's interesting, and it's also enlightening on processes. So I really like that. Thanks so much both for the conversations. Great session. Many insights, many different discussion topic, and wish you all the best with the podcast. And I look forward to meeting you in person again very soon.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Likewise.
And whenever, Joseph, you make the trip over the big pond, don't just stop in Canada, go to Washington, D.C., right? This is where we're going to meet.
I know. Next one is for you, no problem.
All right.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks, J-M. And see you soon.
Friend.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.